Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm really concerned about process. I'm really concerned that this committee vote and this entire nomination is being rushed, and that we're being asked to vote, maybe forced to vote, before all reasonable requests for information have been received. I'm concerned about two categories in particular. One is financial disclosure and information. I'll leave the details of that to Senator Cruz because he's been very focused on that, but I certainly echo his concerns. I want to focus on speeches. One clear category of the normal precedent of what the committee asks is speeches the nominee has made in the last 5 years. That's standard. That's not anything outside the norm. Senator Hagel, in response to that, said he, quote, conducted an exhaustive search for all of my speaking engagement over the past 5 years, close quote. After that so-called exhaustive search, he identified 80 speeches. 29 we have text for, 51 we don't. So one flag is 51 speeches he's identified, we don't yet have the substance. But that's not the biggest flag for me. The biggest flag is that we have found 6 outside speeches that he never identified. Our staff has found them. You know, we had a lot less information to go on than he did, and we've found 6 additional speeches. 5 of those we've just recently gotten text or video, haven't been able to review them. We've literally gotten those, I think, in the last 24 hours. One of those, we know video exists. It's the June 13th, 2008 keynote speech to the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee. We know the video exists, but we don't have it yet. So my request is pretty simple, that we get that video and that we have some reasonable amount of time to review text or video of these 6 speeches and any others that surface. That is squarely within the information the committee always requires. We're just delayed because Senator Hagel didn't disclose it. We had to find it. And so that shouldn't penalize us, and we shouldn't reward him. So again, my request is simple. We have 5 speeches, have them but haven't reviewed them yet, gotten them in the last 24 hours. 1, we know a video exists, we don't have it yet. So I'd like to be able to review that with others before this committee vote, and I think that's a pretty darn reasonable request. And I'd ask for unanimous consent to submit for the record the information regarding these speeches. And Mr. Chairman, can I just ask for your response to that request?
The question is that we ask of all nominees provide the committee with 2 copies of any formal speeches that you've delivered during the last 5 years of which you have copies, and he answered that question.
Well, Mr. Chairman, my point is a pretty obvious one. Yeah, he answered it.
He didn't have copies. He gave us copies of everything that he had. You've apparently been able to find transcripts of speeches from the organizations to which he spoke informally, and that's fine. But he answered the question, and there's no reason to believe he didn't answer it accurately. Formal speeches, 2 copies, last 5 years of which he had copies. Unless you believe he had copies and didn't provide them, then your document will be accepted for the record, but that's it.
Mr. Chairman, he also identified a total of 80 speeches, including speeches which he didn't have copies of.
That's correct.
My point is, these 6 speeches weren't on the list of 80.
Then he didn't remember those speeches. He's not trying to hide speeches if he gave us 80 speeches. I couldn't give you a list of every speech I've made in the last 5 years, particularly informal speeches. There's no way. And if I gave you a list which had 90% of the speeches that I had, I'd be doing pretty well. So unless you think that he intentionally misled this committee and have any evidence of that, we will accept your list for the record.
Putting aside whose fault it was or what his intent was, I can't tell you what his intent was. I can just tell you the facts. Putting that to the side, is it not reasonable for us to review these 6 speeches we now know about before we vote?
You'll have time in the next 24 hours, I don't know when the leader is going to bring this to the floor, but you'll have time to review any speeches that you have access to. But those speeches, you could continue. If there's 80 out there that he's spoken, 80 organizations, after these 6 come in, then you may discover, hey, there's 2 other organizations on that 80 that have found transcripts. This could go on forever. We need a Secretary of Defense. We've had a use of a nuclear weapon in North Korea. We've made every single effort to provide all the information which this committee ever requires, and he has answered this question. And unless you have evidence that he's not answered it honestly, we're going to proceed.
Well, just in closing, I think that request is very reasonable. I'm sorry it's being denied.